Hi guys, today we're going to talk about some of the organelles inside the eukaryotic cell. So if you take a look at this, we're going to review prokaryotes and eukaryotes really quick. So prokaryotes are these really simple cells. They're small, oftentimes bacteria. They're much smaller than eukaryotes, and because of them being small and the fact that their DNA is not held within a nucleus, they're more simple, unicellular, not capable of the complex tasks that eukaryotes can.
And so the next type of cell we'll talk about is eukaryote cells. So eukaryotic cells, they're mostly multicellular, so they have more than one cell. So you think about your body, it's made up of hundreds and thousands and millions of cells that they have different functions, but there's tons of cells making up one organism. So multicellular. They have a nucleus in the middle over there, and they have a nucleus, and they also have organelles, which we're going to talk about in this PowerPoint. Important examples of eukaryotic cells, they're cells that make up plants, they make up animals, so they make up like me and you, and trees, fungus, and also protists are made up of eukaryotic cells.
And these eukaryotes are bigger than the prokaryotes that are much more simple. Over here, you're going to see a simplified eukaryote that we'll be labeling in just a moment.
So we're going to talk about organelles. Now, organelles are small structures that are found inside the cell. Now, if you look down here, you'll see all of these different colored things. Those are all the organelles inside the cell. So they are like organs in our body. They're different structures. They have functions, but they all help to make the cell survive and function as it has to. So they make the cell do the functions that it needs to do.
I like that analogy because it's just like in your body, how your stomach's going to break down food and send that food to your small intestines, which are going to extract the nutrients and the energy from that. So each of these organelles does its own specific job to keep the cell alive in the same way the organs of your body do. So as we move forward in this, we're going to label our simplified eukaryote right here with these different organelles. So it's really important you memorize both what the structure's name is and that you can identify it on a diagram, but then also know the function or what its job is. So it's not enough to just be able to say, hey, that's the nucleus. You have to be able to say something about what the nucleus does.
So the first thing that we'll talk about is the nucleus. So the nucleus is found inside the cell, and this is like the brain of the cell. So the nucleus tells the cell what it's going to do. It helps everything function. So think about your brain. Your brain tells you that you need to walk, or it tells your stomach to digest. So the nucleus is the brain of the cell. Take a second now if you want, pause, and maybe try to think of something else that you use in your life that's a good analogy for a nucleus.
Inside this nucleus, you guys, is not an organelle, but is a molecule that's incredibly important called DNA. So here you see the nucleus that I'm outlining. Inside these little strands here are uncoiled pieces of DNA.
Also found in the nucleus, so the DNA, what the DNA is it contains the chromosomes, and it tells everything what it needs to do. So it's kind of like a map that tells everything how it needs to function. So it's tangled strands, as you can see over here, and it makes up the characteristics. So your DNA says what color your eyes are going to be, what color your hair is, how tall you're going to be. So everything is kind of written in that DNA.
You know what's kind of cool about DNA too is that in every cell, whether it's your eye cell, your stomach cell, your skin cell, your entire code for your entire body is in the DNA of that cell, which I think is pretty crazy. It's not like your eye cells just have eye DNA. They have the entire code for your entire body, which I think is just kind of fun, trippy.
Also in the nucleus is the nucleolus. So the nucleolus is inside the nucleus, and this is what produces ribosomes. So you can see over here, this is the nucleus. So here's the nucleus. The DNA is on the outside here. It's these strands. And then the nucleolus is also inside the nucleus. And this is where it produces ribosomes. Let's see. Over here, there's the nucleolus. And the next thing that we'll talk about is the ribosomes. So ribosomes are sites that produce proteins. So your body is made up of proteins, and the ribosomes are what produces these proteins. They can be found in the nucleolus, or they can be found floating around free, or in the endoplasmic reticulum. So the next thing is cytoplasm. So cytoplasm is a clear fluid that floats around in the cell, and it kind of holds everything together, holds everything in place. Where there's not an organelle, there's going to be some cytoplasm around it.
I like to think of like a balloon. If you were to stuff all these organelles in a balloon and the outside of the balloon is the cell membrane, the air inside the balloon is like the cytoplasm. It takes up space, it speeds chemical reactions. And so on our diagram here, anytime you have kind of empty space, which isn't really empty in the cell but looks empty, that's where you could label cytoplasm.
And our next one is the endoplasmic reticulum. So the primary purpose of the endoplasmic reticulum is it moves stuff throughout the cell. So it breaks down chemicals, and there's chemical reactions that go on, and it transports stuff around the cell. There's two different types. There's rough endoplasmic reticulum, which has ribosomes on the outside of it, and then there's smooth endoplasmic reticulum, which does not have ribosomes on it.
It's folded like this for a reason too, to allow a lot of reactions to occur at once. And to transport things really quickly. So I like to think of one stretch of freeway versus, lots of freeway going back and forth. You can cover a lot more ground when it's folded like this. On our diagram here, we're just doing the rough ER right now. This would be the smooth ER over here, but we don't have that labeled. So the ones that are studded with ribosomes is the rough ER.
And the next thing that we'll talk about is the mitochondria. And when you think of mitochondria, I remember this from my high school biology class, think of the powerhouse of the cell. So this is where the cell gets its energy.
Good. It's going to break down food particles, and that energy that is made available can help power other functions of the cell that we'll talk about. In the diagram, a lot of times, for whatever reason, in diagrams, it's this kidney shape, and you'll see those folded membranes inside of it. Be careful. If you're looking at a plant cell, sometimes these look kind of similar, and they both deal with energy. So we'll talk about that in just a second. In a plant cell, you would have something like chloroplast. We don't have that in our diagram here because this is an animal cell. You can tell because it doesn't have rigid sides, and it's missing some organelles that I'll tell you about that are unique to plants. So chloroplast's job is basically to trap energy from the sun so that the plant can then make food or sugar from that energy. And it's really important. A lot of times in diagrams it looks like the mitochondria, but instead of these folded membranes, you'll see these stacked we're not going to get into exactly how the chloroplasts work right now, but you'll see these stacked bodies here that help trap that sunlight energy and move it around. So only in plants and some protists, not in animals, so you won't label it on your diagram. Excuse me. Lysosomes. Some old textbooks will tell you that they're just found in animal cells, and that's not always clear. They're more common in animal cells for sure, and they're known as the garbage disposal of the cell. They're going to help break down used and old food parts, not food parts, sorry, that is a garbage disposal, used and old cell parts, and so they're going to recycle those parts into other things. On our diagram here, the lysosome is showed right here. These are really important. They're not part of the standard we're asking you to know, but I think it's important that you understand that once these die, they don't just float off to some organelle graveyard. In your body, these different cellular components are recycled and reused. Vacuoles are super important, and both animals and plants have it. In animals, they're small like this, and they help transport different food and enzymes that the cell needs, and sometimes they surround waste so that it can't harm the cell. In plants, they're not small like this all the time. Sometimes you have what's called the central vacuole. It's this large balloon-like structure that can hold water, which supports the cell from the outside, but also hold food enzymes and other materials needed. In plants, you'll see this huge central vacuole that kind of dwarfs the nucleus. That's one of the things that tells you, oh, that's a plant cell. Golgi apparatus, both plants and animal cells have. And here on our diagram, see it right there. Okay. And this takes in proteins and lipids or fats, and it repackages them into a way that's needed by the cell. And once it's kind of reformed these things, it sends them out to the cell, or maybe to exit the cell and help out a different cell or a different reaction in the body. Oftentimes these are made analogous to like mailman or the UPS. They don't actually create anything new. They take people's packages in, maybe they reorganize them a little bit, and they send them out. Plastids is not one on our diagram here. This is also, oftentimes we think of these in association with plants, and they basically store cellular products. So they can store sugars or fats or pigments. Chloroplast is a type of plastid. You can find starches in potatoes. Okay, so probably one of the most important cell parts, although it's not technically an organelle, is the cell membrane. I love this picture down here. It'll make more sense to you as we study it more, but I think of the cell membrane, or the outside of the cell, which you can see right here. I think of it as like the door to the cell. You have to be the right size to fit through the door, you have to be the right particle, or maybe like even a door to your house. You're not going to let everyone in through your front door, I hope, right? You're just going to let some people in that you want in, otherwise you keep it locked. Well, that's the cell membrane. They're going to let some things in and keep others out. The structure is like that of two pieces of peanut butter on bread stacked together. They're sticky. It sticks together so that it has some support, but it's really flexible in the same way that you can kind of bend and move a piece of peanut butter sandwich. Here, let me point out the red dots, or this blanket of red dots, are the phospholipid heads, and they have these tails attached to them. And chemically, they're attracted to the tails of the other phospholipid. So that's the peanut butter that sticks them together, and then here's the phospholipid head on the other side. We'll talk more about this structure in great detail in the future. Cytoskeleton, you don't need to be able to label on a diagram, but it's important to understand the concept of little microtubes and microfilaments that basically provide, they're floating through the cytoplasm, and they provide structure in the same way your skeleton provides structure. And if you've ever broken an arm, and like you've seen what happens when you break bones and there's no longer that structure, you know what I'm talking about. So there's two ways that you can move a cell around its environment. Well, there's more ways, but two cell parts that are involved in that, the cilia and the flagella. Cilia are short hair-like projections. Oftentimes there's many of them that work together to move particles. Like in your respiratory lining, you have cilia that help move up mucus so it doesn't get kind of stuck, or whatever it's carrying can exit. Flagella are tails, basically, that whip the cell around, and you'll see these under microscopes. Most common type of flagella that you guys probably recognize is in sperm. Everyone can picture, you know, what an image of a sperm cell is with the flagella moving it around. And both are used for movement of the cell part. So that's going to conclude a review of major cell parts and organelles. Please, if this feels a little foreign to you, go back and watch this again. Just make sure you haven't missed anything. Make sure you can both diagram or picture what these are and also tell us what they do. And ask yourself as a little test, if you're ready to come to class, what are the four cell parts, not necessarily organelles, but cell parts that we've covered today that you should be able to find both in prokaryotes and eukaryotes? Take a second to think about it, pause the video, look through your notes, and see if you can figure it out. Good, so hopefully you got that the four cell parts that all cells, prokaryotes and eukaryotes, have in common are DNA, the cell membrane, cytoplasm, and ribosomes. But eukaryotes will only have the specialized organelles that we've talked about today that help it function in a more complex way.